Hi, this is Richard Harrington. We will be starting the Google Hangout in just a few minutes. We're going to give people a chance to tune in live. So in just a couple minutes, we'll be starting and taking a look at mobile workflows with Creative Cloud. So I'm just going to send out an invite notice to let everyone know that the Hangout has started, and we'll give you just a couple of minutes to join us, and then we'll get started. Welcome to everyone. We're going to be starting in just about 1 minute. We're going to give folks just joining us a chance to come on in and get logged in. So thanks for joining us today. My name is Richard Harrington. I'm the publisher of Photofocus. And in just a minute, we'll be starting our Mastering Mobile Workflows with Creative Cloud Apps. We're going to be joined by Bryan O'Neil Hughes from Adobe. Just give people another second to join us. Thank you guys for tuning in today. All right, we're going to go ahead and begin. And for those of you who join late or have to drop off at some point, we are recording, so you will be able to see this. Also, please remember, you are more than welcome to ask questions in the Q&A section. So if you are viewing this on the website, you are welcome to post a question in there. I'd love seeing, by the way, if you guys can just let us know that the audio is coming through good, or if you've got a comment or feedback. Totally useful. So thank you. And you're really quick glance there at Bryan. It's doing a nice auto switch between the computers. And we're going to get started here. So let's see what we got to do. We're talking today about mastering mobile workflows and Creative Cloud apps. And what's interesting to me is that I've seen this huge change. Back in the day, I remember being a student at school and seeing a friend who had one of the small black and white iMacs. Macs. And he had a backpack. He was able to put his Mac in it and move it from one dorm room to another. And so that was pretty interesting. And that ability was tough. And what happened there, we're being told we're having a little bit of echo, so I'm just going to mute Bryan's mic while he's talking, and that should solve the echo. The challenge is we're actually in the same room, so hopefully that solves the echo and gets rid of it for everybody. I'm in San Jose visiting Adobe's headquarters. So thank you for pointing out that echo. That's very helpful. And he had a Mac and he was able to lug it around. And now we've got tablets and we've got smartphones and we have all-in-ones and the iPad Pros, and so much is changing. And it's kind of confusing. Where do I work? Do I work on my computer? Do I work on my laptop? Do I work on my tablet? When can I stop working? And how do these apps that are supposed to save me time let me get work done when it's convenient? So we're joined today by Bryan O'Neil Hughes, and Bryan has been the product manager for Photoshop in the past. He's been the head of digital imaging, and he's got a new role. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about his role, and I'm just going to unmute my mic here for a second so we can hear Bryan. And Bryan, why don't you tell us about your new position?
Sure. So my current role is head of outreach and collaboration across the Creative Cloud ecosystem, which is kind of a mouthful. Essentially what it does is it draws upon a decade of product management experience. It draws upon a strong passion for the user and user advocacy. As you know, I'm a teacher and an instructor. I do a lot of stuff for Kelby and Linda and other folks. My passion has always been helping people understand our technology in context. And so I get to work with Apple a lot. I get to work with the press a lot. I get to do a lot of keynotes and whatnot. Think of it as a very outward-facing product management role, because a typical product manager, you wear a lot of different hats and you're internal a lot of the time. But I think that my skill set has always lent itself well to crafting the story and sharing the story and taking what I hear from outside, bringing it back to the teams. So my new role is much broader. It's not just about Lightroom or Photoshop or Bridge or Camera Raw. It's really across mobile, all of it tying back to the desktop.
Great. And what we're seeing here is kind of a big change. I'm going to share my screen for a second. And Adobe has gone through a bit of a shift, I would say. We had first generation mobile apps, and I'm just going to share my screen so you guys can see this. Here we go. And hopefully you are getting a web screen there. And here we go. And so we've got all these different apps that Adobe's making, and you've organized them nicely here so we can see things like, oh, Adobe Capture, create assets to use with other tools, or Photoshop Sketch for drawing or marking up photos. And then we get down into visual storytelling, and then 3 different photography apps, although there's actually more than this. And this is kind of the new generation of apps. And I like that you've integrated and explained what they all do. Now, Bryan, there's a ton of apps here. There's a little bit of confusion of which one I should be using for what. Can you walk people through kind of the vision here and how a Creative Cloud user knows which ones to get and which ones are free, which ones aren't free, and the big picture maybe?
Sure. Yeah. So let's sort of start at the beginning. When the iPad first came out, we were incredibly excited, and I think you sort of see as the iPad evolved, so did our software. First thing we did is we tried to talk to Photoshop. We thought of it as an input device, and so you saw things like the applications which used the Kevlar framework to drive the tools from an iPad or to mix colors on an iPad. And those were fun, they were interesting. It really wasn't how people were using the iPad. The next thing that you saw was applications like Photoshop Express, which has been incredibly popular. There's tens of millions of people who use that one across a variety of different devices, and that one's held on. Think of that one as a sort of all-in-one that anybody could use, but really it wasn't a serious image editing tool. Then what we did was something like Photoshop Touch, which I equate to sort of a Swiss Army knife. Photoshop on the desktop is very much a Swiss Army knife. It was also a popular application, but the problem with stuffing that old interface onto a touch-driven device is that you've got all of these tools on the left and menus on the top and panels on the right, and while that's familiar, it's really not optimized for touch. And some of those applications we sold, some of those applications we gave away. We were sort of maturing with the technology, we were learning as we went, and in the middle of that, the iPhone came along, and it became the world's most used camera. And so when we talk about mobile apps, we're not just talking about iPads. We're certainly not just talking about iOS. We're developing these for Android as well. But we're wanting to come up with really serious solutions for wherever people are. And so I should mention that with all of the newer apps, they're all free. It doesn't matter if you're an existing customer or not. If you are an existing customer, obviously you're going to have deeper integration with the desktop. But no matter who you are, you can use this new collection of applications. Most of them run on both the phone and the tablet, and most of them run on both iOS and Android. In the case of the ones that don't run on Android, we're working on that. But to just sort of tie it all up, they're all project-based, which means that you can get to your work from multiple devices. They're all free. They all have desktop relatives, although they don't necessitate them. They integrate with them. And they're all they use a consistent look and feel. So really a totally new way of doing things. Think of them as mobile-first apps. We are not saying, let's just carbon copy this experience on the desktop and stuff it onto a mobile app. Let's really rethink what it looks like.
And that makes a lot of sense. What we're seeing, for example, is the ability to get work done on the go. So the first one you mentioned there was Photoshop Express. And this is one of those apps. I'm going to show it really quick just so people see it. If you like Photoshop and you really wish that you could do more on your computer, on your tablet, I should say, you might find this pretty useful. So let me just pop this up so you all can see it here. It's just going to take a second. There we go. And I'm going to share my screen. I wish that Google made this just a little bit faster, but here we go. So you should all be seeing Photoshop Express here. And we've got the ability to do images on our device. We can see images from our Creative Cloud folder. We can access Facebook images and Dropbox images, and it's great that everything's so connected. And if I decide that I want to do something, I can open up an image, and across the bottom, a lot of different looks, and plenty of other mobile apps have gone down this path. You did have the ability for premium looks, and you referenced some of this. These are available if I'm a Creative Cloud customer, right? So I can unlock those. And I can also make my own looks. But we did have the ability to do all the stuff we're used to, like actually make corrections and to get in there and reduce noise, to remove and change the exposure, to defog. And I think the model here on this sort of first generation is the premium content was designed for cloud users. So you would get access to some of that. But it's pretty cool. And all the other sorts of things, including some basic ability for blemish removal and actually zoom in and remove content and get in there. And it's kind of cool that we had all these controls as well as comparison and fixing. And so Bryan, with this first generation, what was kind of the thought? We saw this, it seems like in a way you were shrinking Photoshop down and taking the best of and putting it on a tablet. Was this to broaden the reach of Photoshop, to get more people using Adobe technology? What was the logic?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of people are playing around in the application space, specifically in the imaging space. It's I think it's second only to games in how crowded it is. We have a very long history of working in and inventing that space, really. And so there was a lot of stuff, a lot of opportunities to do things better. In the case of Photoshop Express, I think that the biggest win for that app is just accessibility. It's really easy to use. It gives you access to a subset of Photoshop's controls. A lot of those things are table stakes at this point. A lot of those things like cropping and looks adjustments and whatnot, you can do that just about anywhere. What I find when I use an app like Express, which when I'm doing things like social media, I'll often push a file through there, is it's really fast, it's really consistent, and the quality is really good. If you want to go deeper than that, whether you're an existing user who's looking for true grade Photoshop tools on your mobile device, or you're just interested in a Photoshop workflow that might have scared you in the past, something like compositing or retouching, that's the philosophy with the newer applications. They're much more task-based. So Express it's admittedly a holdout. It was one of our first applications, and it's still going strong just because it has so many users that love it. But it really is it's an all-in-one for so many different workflows. Again, it runs on phones and tablets. So it's different than the other apps, but it's equally useful. And like I said, there are more people using that app than just about any of ours, with the possible exception of something like Aviary, which we acquired not too long ago, and they power all sorts of other apps.
So now what we're seeing is sort of a new generation, and we've seen devices change. My new smartphone has a touch-sensitive screen, and I can press on the screen to get additional interactions. I have an iPad Pro that's coming in the mail. We're seeing on the same side with some of the Pro apps, you guys have done stuff for the Surface with touch-based workspaces, taking desktop software on those sort of super tablets that are capable of doing so much more. You recently spent a lot of time with the iPad Pro. You got a chance to work with Apple on making sure that all the Adobe apps were ready. Talk to me about Fix and Mix. Those are sort of the two new players here. And what do they do for a photographer? If you want to show anything, that's totally cool too.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit about them first, and then I'll show you, because it's always a lot more fun to show this stuff than talk about it. But prior to coming into my current role, between Photoshop and this role, I was really honored and challenged to work on a couple of 1.0 products, brand new products, And the first one I did was working with Jeff Chen, who's just a brilliant engineer. He's got just a ton of patents, and he brought together this amazing team. And we did Photoshop Mix, which was all about compositing and selective edits. The whole idea was to take this workflow that's really scary and sort of dizzying and make it friendly and powerful, so we could share it with a whole new group of users, but at the same time give existing users a way to build meaningful composites on the go. And we followed that up just this last year at Max with Photoshop Fix, which is all about retouching. Fix is a really, really cool app. It's probably the most feature-rich 1.0 I've ever seen come out of Adobe. And for that one, I worked with Jeff, and I worked with a gentleman named Lance Lewis. Both of those guys are long-time Photoshop DI guys, and they're pretty amazing. There's a great guy named Manu who now is the product manager on both of those apps, and I think he's moved those forward really nicely. I'll show them to you in just a second, but again, the philosophy with these is that compositing and retouching are both really deep buckets, and we want them to be accessible to a lot of people. And so we didn't want to just take features from the desktop and bring them over. We wanted to completely rethink the experience. So if we can switch over to my iPad, I'll show you how this works here.
You just click on the screen share button in the upper left corner. I'll show you that one. Roll over to the left.
Oh, roll over to the left. I'm glad I've got you here with me. Screen share.
Yep. And then just share your desktop.
My desktop.
See, we really are in the same place. There you go. And now just you got your QuickTime, and you should be seeing that.
Okay.
We are seeing that. Perfect.
Excellent. All right. So let me just quickly walk you guys through Mix and Fix. I think these is a lot of fun. I should mention, as Rich said, I was really honored to work with Apple on rolling out the iPad Pro. And if you were watching the Max keynote, you saw that I was actually driving the demonstrations from an unreleased iPad Pro, and that was a great opportunity to collaborate with them. And we actually re-architected Mix so that we could do much more. It's built on Apple's Metal framework, and it allows us to do incredible things. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little, because the first thing I want to talk about is that you see everything in a project view when you come in here. And that's really important, because if I were to take my phone and log into Mix, this is where we use that Adobe ID for access. And you mentioned this before. The access will allow me to get to my Creative Cloud files. It'll allow me to get to my Lightroom photos. It'll allow me to get to my stuff wherever I am. And when we first took a serious look at apps, we realized that, yes, there was absolutely a need to bring powerful editing tools over to the iPad and the phone, but there was also a need to just access your stuff. And so all of these projects are things that I've been working on in Mix. And were I to take out my phone and log into that, these would all be available to me there in their current state. Rich, if I were to take your iPad and sign you out and sign myself in, I'd also see them there as well. So here's how it works. I take an image, and I should mention these are full resolution images. These are high-res images. We can open files that are 30, 40 megapixels, no problem. And people might say, well, you don't have files that size on mobile devices, but if you've ever shot a pano with an iPhone, you know that it's pretty easy to hit that size really quickly. But if I zoom in here, you see there's tremendous detail in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut out the sky, and I'm going to swap it with another sky. And I'm dragging my finger over this, and it's just like Quick Select in Photoshop, which is to say that it's learning about the selection as we go. And as I zoom in, my brush dynamics change, and they become more precise. And so if I come in here and just sort of edge that out and then invert my selection, I've built a really nice selection really quickly and easily. This was a real challenge. We wanted to take that power of our selection tools and map them to touch, which is obviously a little bit clunkier. So what I would do here is I would then just take a really colorful image. Those of you guys who know me know I'm a car guy. Drop a colorful car in there, and I'm just going to drag that to the background, pinch and zoom it, and I've built this really nice composite. Now, where it really changed when we re-architected things to run using Metal and to take advantage of the GPU is we're no longer limited to 2 layers. I can come in here and I could add another layer, and that other layer can be a texture, because we've also put blend modes in here. So I can do this sort of thing that you know, up until very, very recently, if I want to do blend modes, multi-layered masks, I would definitely have to go to the desktop for that. So that's just sort of a taste of some of that. The way that it works is, of course, I can save it locally, but I can also save it to Lightroom, and it'll be available to me across any of the different mobile apps. And you can even get to Lightroom files on the web now, which is great. But if I send it to Photoshop, it'll be a completely pristine file. All the layers, all the masks, the blend modes, even if I were to make a tonal adjustment, that comes in as a smart object. It's a really, really deep integration. Let me show you one more thing in Mix, and then we'll pop over to Fix. The other thing that I think is really cool in Mix is this sort of double exposure look that's really popular. You see it in the credits for things like True Detective, and people want to know how to do this. It's pretty tricky on the desktop. We wanted to make it really easy here. This is a picture of my wife that I've obviously already selected, and what we're going to do is we're going to just drop in another image. I'll use this image of these trains. And if you guys saw the Max Keynote, what I'm showing you is sort of some of the Max Keynote highlights, but with a lot more information. What I do is I just drag the picture of Tam onto the picture of the trains, and I say, let's copy that mask. And so now it's going to trim them to her.
Cool.
Yeah. So you can see I can get that look really quickly and easily, and then I could add other textures and other layers from there.
That comes to my mind as I look at stuff like this is that this could be used on set, or you're traveling back from the shoot, or you're on a plane. We now have the ability with wireless apps from a lot of camera manufacturers that we could be syncing. Like I can send a 42 megapixel JPEG from my Sony a7S right to my tablet, and I could be doing stuff, and the full quality is there. When I hand that back off to Photoshop, it's still going to be a 42 megapixel file, right?
Yep. Yeah. So one of the stress here is that everything we're doing here, it's non-destructive, and we're really honoring the file. So it's just like the age-old rule with whether it's audio or video or images. Whatever you put into it is what you get out of it, right? So if you put in a garbage image, that's what you're going to get out of it. Unfortunately, a lot of imaging apps, if you put in a good image, you're going to get garbage out. We honor whatever the file looks like, and we preserve it. And I think that in itself is pretty unique. We don't want to punish you for editing in the mobile space.
So how does this change? We now have the ability with the iPad Pro. There's more processing power. Some of these apps are moving to Android, where there's a lot of flexibility in the tablet space. Do you see that in the future photographers can be, not just touching up images, but that this might be enough, that the tablet can replace the laptop in the field? I certainly would be happy if it switched out the weight.
Yeah, so there's really two types of people that we're talking about here. Mobile is so broad, right? I joke that one of the few things that my 91-year-old grandmother and my 6-year-old son have in common is the iPhone, right? They can both appreciate videos and content and texting and FaceTime and all these things. So on the one hand, we want to bring our solutions to a lot more people. And the intent with this stuff is to say, hey, you're all photographers now, you're all videographers now, you're all doing these amazing things. Let's help you take it to the next level. So that's definitely part of it. That's why the apps are free. That's why they're easier to use. But there are also a lot of people, our existing customers, who are on the desktop who want to be able to do things that they can't normally do away from the desktop. And we're very aware of the fact that creativity doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen when you're sitting at your desk. It happens wherever you are. So for those people, we want to give them the ability to do things elsewhere. Now, to jump way ahead with your question and say, do I foresee a world where you don't need the desktop? There are people already, serious people, serious artists who are already doing a lot of their work on mobile devices. I recently, on this iPad Pro tour, met artists in Hollywood who they're doing all of their digital painting on the iPad.
Very cool. All right, so let's take a look. I've opened up Photoshop Fix, and you should do the same. And I've been playing with this just a little bit. And what I'm seeing here, let me just switch over so you all can see it. And then, Brian, if you want to open yours up as well, we can take a look. And it's pretty cool. What this is doing is the ability to make pretty decent adjustments on the actual screen itself. And so let me just trust my computer here so we can see it. There we go. And we have the ability, like before, to access things in a ton of places. You mentioned Lightroom. We're going to talk about that workflow later. This idea that as you get back from a shoot, you may have a bunch of images that you want to work with, or you're in the middle of a project and you can take it forward. But I can see all this stuff here, and any organization I've done is there. I can see things that are just locally on my iPad. I can go to the camera, take a quick picture right here if I needed to. You know, we can do all that stuff. I can access my Creative Cloud folder and actually see things that I've stored, which is pretty cool. And this opens up all sorts of abilities to jump in and grab stuff. So there really is true flexibility, including the fact that since you could share that with others, you can collaborate on those. So I can open up an image, and it comes in, and we have a lot of tools here. You know, if we go to adjust, what really stands out to me is that we have true shadows and highlights abilities, as well as the exposure controls. This is fairly intuitive. I can drag through, I can recover my highlights, I can lift up my shadows, giving that sort of precise control that I want. I have the ability to actually work with stuff in here and quickly see before and afters. I can commit my changes, and you guys did a lot. The focus control, the vignette controls, give people, you know, this is not just a simple cheesy vignette filter like lots of folks have. You really have the ability here to dial in exactly what you want as a user and to round out the shape. I mean, these are not your typical, I'm just going to call it, for lack of a better term, cheesy Instagram filters. You guys put a lot of work into this. What was the logic, and why so many controls? And you know, what are people doing with it?
Right. So it's all layers under the hood, which is pretty amazing. And one of the things that really separates it is that everything that you do in there can be undone. You've got about 20 states of undo in there with the little arrows, but everything is also built on layers. So even without understanding layers, you'll notice that anything that you do in Fix, you can go back and you can undo it. You could restore it. So you have the flexibility of a layer-based workflow, even though you're interacting with pixels. You're doing something that, you know, is traditionally a very destructive process. Where that all really comes together, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean too much to you if you're not an existing Photoshop user. It just means that, okay, you can undo things, you can redo things. But were you to send one of those images over to Photoshop, it would come in with each individual layer, mask, and it uses a prescriptive process. So we don't even use the terms dodge and burn in Fix. We want it to be that friendly. It's just called lighten and darken. But if you were to do lightening and darkening in Fix and then send it over to Photoshop, and you were to double click on that layer, it would launch a curves adjustment layer. So once you're in Photoshop, it's leading you down the right path. And then there are things in Fix, which I'm happy to show you, that you can't even do on the desktop. There are a couple features in there that don't even exist on the desktop yet. So if you don't mind me sharing
let me switch over to your screen there. And I love when you say yet. That's always a code word that good things come. So show me what you got.
All right. So I'm going to open an image of myself, which is always a little strange, but you know, the truth is, when it comes to retouching, that's a problem that people are always trying to solve, is pictures of people. And I joke that I'm the poster child for imperfection. So this is a good example for that. So if we want to come in here and do something like healing, I can just come in and I can start getting rid of, you know, blemishes. I can just come right through the image here. And this works either like a spot healing tool or a brush. It's kind of a hybrid. This is the same power that Photoshop has. It's actually, it goes a little bit beyond that, because we're able to do things that we couldn't do in Photoshop. Like, for instance, let's say we took an area and we scrubbed that, and then we said we wanted to patch that. We could choose to get that content from anywhere else that we want. So we have this hybrid tool between the patch tool and the spot healing tool, which also has the clone stamp tool built into it. When we want to do something like, say, desaturate, maybe I want to work on my teeth, we just come in and we look at the color in there, and we come in here and I'm just scrubbing over my teeth and desaturating those. With any of these, I can come back and look at an overlay. We can always look at it before and after. And then I talked about being able to do a couple of things that we can't do traditionally in Photoshop. One of those is something like skin smoothing. And if you're a seasoned Photoshop user, you know different ways to do this, but there is no explicit way to do it in Photoshop. What's really cool about Fix is that if I come in here and I start dragging my finger over my forehead or even over my eyes and cheeks, and I'm laying it on a little heavy so you can see it through the hangout. If I were to toggle that overlay, you see I've scrubbed it all over my face, but if we zoom in close, you'll notice that my eyes aren't blurred and the hairs aren't blurred. So we've actually looked at what is skin and what isn't skin, and we've worked on tuning it just for that. So we won't go in there and blur detail. We will just soften and smooth skin. I think the most fun example, and the one I'll finish with, and those of you who are Macs have seen this, but it never really gets old, is the ability to use liquify. And so the first thing I'll do with this is I'll turn my device, and I mean just the act of the interface rotating, that's not a small thing. A lot of apps don't do that. The way liquify works in here is I click on the face button and it drops pins on my friend's face here. It knows where his eyes, nose, cheeks, and mouth are. So I can come in here and I can change the size of his eyes, the tilt of his eyes, the width of his nose, the width of his mouth, even the expression on his face. So this is a great example of Fix driving innovation. This is functionality that we never had on the desktop, and we knew that moving these features over to a touch environment meant that we had to completely rethink what the input looked like. And so in wanting to reach more people and wanting to make it more playful and fun, we came up with an entirely new way of automatically segmenting the face.
Very cool. Go ahead and click your stop screen share button, all right, so we can see your face. I got a couple of questions for you, and we'll talk through a few things, and I want to talk about Lightroom Mobile here in a second too. So these are, let me just unmute my mic there so you guys can hear me better. These are pretty cool things here, and what I'm seeing is that we're taking tasks that people want to do on the go, and we can do them on the go. And if, unlike other solutions that destroy the photo, you're doing a lot of this stuff non-destructively, so I can go back and make tweaks. So, for example, you were just showing liquify. Will that apply to a smart object, or is it destructive in this case? What's your guys' workflow?
Yeah, so liquify is an inherently destructive process. It always has been, and it is on the desktop, although recently with Photoshop we were able to figure out how to make that a smart filter. So if you know what you're doing in Photoshop, you can actually use a non-destructive way of liquifying. But liquify in Fix is a destructive process. You can restore anything that you've done in there, but once you go into liquify, we actually have to flatten the image out. Everything else that we do in there, we jump between the layers, we honor the other states, but liquify is mashing the pixels around so much that when you go in there, we take that state and we mash it down into liquify. So liquify is sort of the exception to the rule in Fix. Everything is non-destructive, except for liquify, which is very much hammering away on the pixels. But within that liquify dialog, you can still restore things with the brush. But it's definitely not a lightened version of liquify. I should say, I think it's people sometimes have their perception that because these are task-based applications and because they're not all-in-ones or they don't look like they do on the desktop, that they're somehow less than. Not only is the workflow and interface much, much faster than a lot of things on the desktop, what we're doing with the chip is pretty remarkable. So in the case of Mix and Fix, they're heavily reliant on the GPU. And so not only can we open huge images, but you can do things in real time very, very quickly. Obviously, we had a very close collaboration with Apple with the iPad Pro. One of the things that they loved about our software is that it takes such full advantage of that A9X chip that we're able to do such incredible things.
Well, this brings up a good point, and there were a few questions, there always are, from the Android users of, and I know you can't say when, but could we talk about Adobe's strategy of iOS versus Android for a second? Some of these apps are available cross-platform. What's the intent? Does Adobe intend to make all apps cross-platform, or going forward, what for the photography segment in particular, what can people expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of the apps that we have today are available as well on Android. We're turning these things out really quickly. There's a lot of workflows we want to solve. We're putting them on phones. We're putting them on tablets. In the case of something like Mix or Lightroom Mobile or Photoshop Express, no problem. You can use those on Android or iOS today. You can use a lot of these things on phones and tablets. In the cases of the ones where we aren't there yet, like the very latest version of Mix with blend modes or with Fix, we're working on it and we'll get there. Adobe, you've worked with us for a long time. Adobe is a company, very common for us to develop on one platform, perfect it, test the heck out of it, and then port it to another one. We did that with Photoshop. If you recall, Photoshop was a Mac-only app when it started. For those of you who have been with us for a while, you remember we did the same thing with Lightroom when we started. That was a Mac-only app in its first series of betas, and then we ported that over. Often these things are very daunting. It turns out in the mobile world, especially if you put them on the GPU, it's much easier to move them around. So in some cases, like the application Slate, which has been a really cool app for building like interactive, it's almost like web apps, beautiful, beautiful content. We put that on the web recently. We went from having that be an iPad app, an editor's choice iPad app, to now it's available on the web, because what we heard from people is, you know what, this is cool on the tablet, but I want this on the web because that's where I'm sourcing a lot of my content and that's where I'm ultimately viewing it. So I want to create it there. So super long-winded answer, as always with me. You pull the string and you're going to hear me talking for a while. Not only do we care about Android very, very much, and not only are we committed to moving our applications as a whole portfolio over there, and we've said that these new crop of mobile apps will definitely make their way to Android, and you've already seen that. But I wouldn't think just in terms of iOS and Android, and I'll leave it at that. I'll just say that it's much broader than that, and what Slate has done recently is a great example of that.
Cool. Well, I'm going to show two of the other apps that I love that I think have interesting implications to folks. And the first one was actually a bunch of apps that got merged together. So let me just switch over to this. You guys should be seeing Adobe Capture. Do you see that screen, Bryan? Is it up?
Not just hit the usually the slightest way.
The slightest way. There it is. Okay, good. So this does 4 different things. The ability to capture colors, shapes, brushes, and looks. I'm going to talk about looks in a second, but colors are kind of cool. Like I can click on that I want to capture colors and access my camera here and point it at stuff or open up a picture from something, and it starts to grab all the colors in a scene and build a color palette. And I could take that color palette, give it a name, like we're going to call this corporate blue. I got to remember to type on the iPad, not the screen. The problem of having too many electronic devices. There we go, corporate blue. And I can choose to sync this to a library for a client, and stick it where I want it to go. There we go. And I'll just hit return, and I'll save that. And now, there it is. It's going to go forward, and I'll switch to Photoshop for a second. And you see that I have different libraries available, and I can grab those, and stuff will actually sync across. So that's going to come across here in a second. I'm going to grab one that I already did. And what I like about these themes is I can use them to get stuff. So I've got different colors here, and that makes it easy to just grab one of those colors out of that palette. So if I wanted to make a new layer and maybe grab a brush and introduce some of those colors into a theme, I could start brushing that on a new layer and just set that layer into a color mode or a tint mode and use color to influence things, or make a gradient map with that, but start to pull this palette in for that fun hand-painted type look. And it's awesome how all this stuff just starts moving between your different devices, and you can sync those together and have those palettes that you capture. It also captures crazy things like shapes. So you could grab your logo and make a watermark out of it and actually just have a vector logo and take your signature on a piece of paper or your brand and create a very quick watermark for your images. So when I'm on Capture here, let me just switch back to that. I can get in and let me just go here and say that I want to capture. We'll exit the colors, go back to the main screen here. This is where I always get thrown. There we go. And let me just get back out of that. I'll delete that library for a second. And I'm going to make a shape. This is where we can go and capture an object, and I can point it at something and just totally start to grab onto a logo. And once I capture that, it's kind of cool. It's going to give that ability to pull things out, and you can erase things from it, you can add to it, and that's cool. The one that I really love, though, is this idea of being able to go in and make a look. And this is really fun. This is where you go in and you can start to look at colors and actually pick up color palettes from a scene. And once you capture that, you can then apply that to an image and see how it's going to color grade or manipulate an image. And you see how you can do that. You can latch on a color and give it a little more emphasis, and that affects the photo. Or you can see that layered on a video file and see the before and after. Now, right now, this stuff is only syncing over to Premiere and Lightroom, but it's actually in your library, and you can grab them. And what Photoshop offers is this incredible feature, and I so hope that this will get tied into Photoshop, but these color lookups allow you to go and load these things that you've made. And this is where you can start to get film stocks and other cool stuff, or we can just load our own 3D LUTs, point ourselves at our Creative Cloud folder, and on your Creative Cloud folder, you can actually find all that stuff. I'm just looking for my cloud folder. Where am I putting it? It's somewhere. But you can go in and grab from your Creative Cloud folder and load that in. Let me just go up for a moment and see if I can remember where I put it. No, it's always fun. There it is, Creative Cloud folder. And so I can grab these, and in there, you can have any of these LUTs or lookup tables that you made and then apply them. Now, hopefully this will translate over. These are all newer apps, but I think Capture is a lot of fun. The ability to see a scene like a sunset or a cool blue night and start to layer that in. The ability to go into a library and start to build out your own color libraries and textures, to go in there and find themes from a trip. Like, here's one I made in Costa Rica. These are the colors I was seeing everywhere, and I could introduce that back into my photography, which is kind of cool. And then lastly, let's just put that QuickTime back up there for a second. We have the ability to do some pretty cool things, and that is Adobe Clip is the same idea. This is Premiere for the iPad or other devices, and you can actually, when you sign in, grab video off of your library, and you can start to, I gotta sign in real quick, and you can, oh, I'm not on the internet, that's the problem. Let me just disconnect here from your Wi-Fi. I'm at a headquarters where I don't have permission to be on the Wi-Fi, so that's probably the problem. I know what the issue is. So we'll just turn on the cellular data. This is the problem with the cloud, Brian, right? You're never live with data all the time, are we?
Well, and while you're doing this, I'll explain that a lot of the time people ask about the login and what the login is about. Why do you have to sign into these apps? So the apps are free, but you do need to sign into them. And the benefit of signing into them is we know where your images are and who to serve it up to. So as long as you give us an ID, and again, that doesn't have to cost anything, we can move your images between your devices, and we can also assure that any of your desktop content or Creative Cloud content is available to you on your mobile devices. So as Rich does that, I'll just explain that all of that full capture content is available throughout the mobile apps, but it's also available on the desktop, and that's all facilitated by that ID. So yes, it's sometimes a hassle to sign in. Hopefully you just have to do that once, but the benefit is you can get all of your stuff ready to go.
Yeah, what I had done there is I needed to sign in, but now there it is. So you enter your Adobe ID, and you would do that. I'm not going to do that live, but I'll show that to you in a moment. Brian, why don't you take over for a second, and we'll share your screen for a second. But I think this stuff is pretty cool. We have the ability to do some awesome stuff.
So I'm going to share my screen once more. Just to...
There we go.
Okay.
I see it.
So let's just talk really, really quickly about what we're doing with Lightroom Mobile, because we talked about Mix and Fix, and there's a lot more to show with either one of those. But I want to explain what's a little bit different over here. So in the case of Lightroom Mobile, this is really about accessing your images wherever they are. So these are images that I've synced from the desktop. And what's cool about this is that I maintain this non-destructive workflow. So if I were to come into this image and say that I wanted to reset it, I can reset it to the original state that it came in as. It looked like a black and white image, but it's actually not a black and white image underneath everything. It's a color image. And I can come in and I can auto-tone this. I can recover the highlights. I can even do crazy things like add more clarity, add more vibrance, even things like dehaze. I could come in here and I could cut through the haze in this image in the background. I can do all this cool stuff, and everything that I do will then sync back to the desktop. Now, people ask all the time, well, you know, are you editing the raw files here? There's no way to edit raw files on a mobile device here on the iOS side yet. But what happens here is that I just have a little proxy file, and it describes the image that I see on my desktop. So this is an HDR image that I built in Lightroom. It's a full resolution image. I can rank it, I can edit it, I can do whatever I want to it, and this file will then share its instructions back to the desktop. So if I said that this image is now going to be you know, black and white, or I'm going to make some change to it, once I change it, the next time I go to the desktop, that change will be reflected there. So think of Lightroom Mobile not just as a container for all of our images, again, that's available not just in Lightroom, but in the mobile apps as well. But think of it as a way of getting to our desktop apps, our desktop images, and editing those as well. So you'll notice that in any of the mobile apps, I can get to Creative Cloud and I can get to those individual files, but I can also get to all of those files from Lightroom. So really about access and getting to your stuff wherever you are. And I think that the one other one that I want to point out to you that, you know, doesn't seem like it's the most exciting application on the surface of things. You can see we have a lot of different apps, but easily one of the most useful is the Creative Cloud app. And if you guys are Creative Cloud members, which I assume most of you are, if you don't have this app yet, you're going to want to check it out, because what it allows you to do, again, is get access to your files. These can be anything. They can be JPEGs, PSDs, PNGs, TIFFs, you name it. But you can't. It's not just about getting to them. It's about renaming them, moving them, deleting them, or even sharing them with folks. So I could send a link to this image to Rich, and then he could use that in his presentation. Maybe I show him my double exposure workflow, and later he said, that was really cool. Could you send me those files? I could just do that from right here. I could send them from wherever I am. So all of that stuff that you can do on the desktop, you can do on mobile devices, on the phone, on tablet, on Android, on iOS, in the Creative Cloud app. I could spend all day walking you guys through stuff, but those are just sort of greatest hits that I want you to know about.
And that's very cool. Let me switch over here for a second. So what we're seeing is the ability to truly sort of move stuff around. That if I take the time to sync things from Lightroom, I could take images on the go and work. If I'm collaborating with others, I could absolutely do that. For example, when we produce the Photofocus podcast, I will take my raw audio podcast files, dump them into my Creative Cloud folder, and share them with our editor, Pamela. And she produces the show and then hands it back to me. And so across the country, or sometimes across the world, we're passing files back and forth. And that's kind of cool that that's included with our membership, and it makes it easy. I could just share just that stuff without sharing everything else. So right there from the desktop, Bryan's able on his tablet on the go, he can be working with an app, make a change, and then easily share that out to everybody else, which is pretty cool. So he can get the image to he's happy with it, and then when he's happy, share it to the client, and you know, you can actually then make sure that they've received it and then turn that sharing off. So it's kind of cool how he can run his photography on the go off of the tablet. Bryan, anything else that with these apps you're seeing?
Yeah, there's a ton more to it. I mean, there are other applications that I haven't even delved into, but I think one thing that I would like to talk about and show people that really speaks to the access and that folks just don't know about is that at Max, we've rolled out all this cool new stuff. We rolled out updates to all of our mobile apps that were available right away. We talked about a bunch of desktop app changes that we were going to make. But we also made a bunch of changes on the Lightroom side, and I didn't get to show them all. I think I got about 15 minutes on stage, which in Max terms is a lot. But I didn't get to show one of my favorite things, which is what we're doing with Lightroom on the web. So if I can screen share one more time and show you in my web browser, Rich, you can tell me if we're seeing that. If I just go to adobe.com.
I'm not seeing it yet.
You're
Click
not?
the share button,
Oh, sorry.
and then move your web browser forward.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of people say that.
Screen share, desktop.
Yep.
Start screen sharing. And right there.
Okay.
Okay. So here is what I see if I navigate to adobe.com and I'm logged in. Again, this is the advantage of the login. It knows who I am. It knows where all of my stuff is. And this one's kind of discrete, but it's really, really powerful and really cool. If I come down here to assets, I've got libraries, which is the stuff that Rich showed you before, Creative Cloud files, Document Cloud files, fonts and colors, but I've got Lightroom photos. And if I come in here, we're going to see those exact same files we were just looking at, okay? So if I come in and I click on that, these are the various files. This is obviously a big pano there. I've got all sorts of different ones. These are the exact files we were just looking at. They're available to me wherever I am. There's the car in the state that we just edited it, right? It's already adjusted that. But what folks don't understand or don't know is that in addition to previewing these and flag ranking them and sorting them, I can actually edit them as well. So we actually have a subset of Lightroom running in the web. So not only can I send somebody a link to a file, but they could actually edit the file online. And this is going to take just a second because it's fetching a big old file there. But you'll notice on the right-hand side of my screen, we see some familiar controls. These are all these things that I'm used to seeing on the desktop. It's not 100% of Lightroom, but it's quite a bit of it. So let's say I choose to switch that to black and white, and maybe we'll come down here and open up the shadows a little bit since I compressed that image. And then maybe I want to come down and back down that clarity a little. When I come back to my mobile device or my desktop, those changes will be reflected on that image. So I think it's a pretty big deal, not just the fact that you can get to your files, but you can edit them anywhere. That means I could go into any classroom, anywhere in the world, or even take anyone's mobile device, and as long as I log in, that's going to give me access to my files and the ability to edit them. So I think it's a great example of what I was talking about before, which is don't think of this stuff as iOS versus Android versus XYZ. Think about it as being able to meaningfully access and edit your files wherever you are.
Well, I think this is very cool. One of the things I'm noticing a trend is mobile apps are moving into web apps and web services. And so, you know, we now have affordable cloud storage. We have the ability to put our stuff in a lot of places, and we can get to that stuff. And so now our desktop tools can access these files. Our mobile tools can access these files. And I think this is interesting. As a photographer, put your best work so it's accessible. So you can build galleries for clients, so you can quickly pull stuff together. If you're in the middle of some active projects, you can absolutely put that in your Creative Cloud folder and then access it. You need to pull up a tablet, you can do some stuff there. You can do it on the desktop. You can move around. So I think this is pretty cool. Bryan, I really appreciate you going deep on this today and helping folks. Remember, this is available after the fact as a streaming file, so you guys can dig in and watch the rest of it. I know a couple of you were having some issues with screen sharing towards the end there, so feel free to go back and watch the parts that you missed. But I really appreciate you tuning out. Bryan, where can people go to find out more information about these apps? Is there a good central place?
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe you could share that. Within the applications, there are tutorials to help you get started. They live in the app. In fact, in the case of something like Mix, there's an interactive tutorial where it teaches you as you use it. If you want to go a little bit deeper, the Max Keynote, all of that lives online in its various pieces. So you can sort of tune into the part that you care about, whether it's illustration or video or my section, which was photography, and you can watch you know, in the comfort of your own home on your own time. If you don't find what you're looking for, and Rich, I'll just ask you to type this in there, share my email address, which is bhughes@adobe.com. Send me an email. I can't promise that we're going to be, you know, lifelong correspondence or anything, But if you don't find what you're looking for, I want to make sure that you do, and I'm happy to send it to you. So hopefully one of those links gets you there, but if it doesn't, reach out to me, and I'll be sure that you get what you need. Always really nice talking to you, Rich. I get a bunch of ideas, and you just showed me how that LUT stuff worked in a way that I had heard described, but I had never done myself. So thank you.
Very cool. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for joining me today. And actually, I'm here at Adobe headquarters. Remember, this is available live afterwards. That URL Bryan mentioned is adobe.com/creativecloud/catalog/mobile.html. We'll make a friend, yeah, it just runs off the tongue. We'll make a friendly URL for that. In fact, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to go to bit.ly. I'm going to paste that in, and we're just going to call that Adobe, and let's just customize that and see if the word mobile app is taken. It is already taken. Mobile apps, already taken. Mobile apps 16. There we go. bit.ly/mobileapp16 will get you right to those apps as a shortcut. So hopefully that helps, and that link will be good into the new year. But we'll post that in the resources for this Hangout. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And we do have a bunch of great tutorials on this over at photofocus.com, so I hope that helps you out. Thanks, everybody, for coming today.